Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our August version of Virginia Voices. I'm really totally pleased to have two wonderful poets with us. Fairouz Bsharat is a junior literary arts major at the Appomattox Regional Governor's School for the Arts and Technology. She is currently the Virginia Youth Poet Laureate Ambassador for Chester. Her passion for poetry drives her to hope and help motivate future poets. Her Instagram is Fairouz Kazoo at Fairouz or Fairouz B.
Yeah, hello.
So welcome, Fairouz. Our other poet tonight is Susan Notar. Susan is a Pushcart Prize nominated poet who has flown over Iraq wearing body armor and makes a mean beurre blanc sauce. Nicely done, Susan. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including Artemis, Bridgewater Review, Burning Word, Virgin, Gyroscope, Penumbra, The Poet, American Literary, Joys of the Table, an anthology of culinary verse. Oh, I bet that's good. And written in Arlington. She works for the U.S. State Department, helping vulnerable communities in the Middle East.
I could interrupt for just a second. I wanted to ask everybody to mute themselves other than the two featured poets and our host, Steve Bucher. And I also wanted to mention that Fairouz has made a change to her IG Instagram, and it's at Fairouz Poetry, and it's in the chat.
Yeah, guys, and feel free to make ample use of the chat as we go along with any comments you might have about the poetry. It is very helpful for the poets who are reading in these sessions to see what you guys think and to get some feedback and what struck you as being interesting. So please feel free and comfortable to join in the chat. So far this is a very dynamic and collegial group, so it's wonderful having you here and wonderful to share these two poets with you. So Susan, why don't you start off for us and read a poem?
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. So I thought because it's a summer evening and it's still light out, I'm not going to read some of my dark, heavy poems today. I thought maybe I would read some lighter ones. And the first one, a friend of mine actually, who's on the chat or who's in the group, Michelle, helped me kind of come up with this idea. And I knew I wanted to write this poem, and it's called Laura Petrie Reimagined. Laura Petrie was played by Mary Taylor Moore in the iconic Dick Van Dyke TV show in the 1960s. What if Laura Petrie didn't just don her pearls, her 1960s tight polyester slacks, and make tater tot casserole at night for Dick and their son Richie? What if sardonic one-liners and flipping the ends of her hair and that brown Jackie O bob weren't all she was good at? What if Laura Petrie was a hit woman? What if in her underwear drawer, stashed under those pointy bras and slips, or better yet, among her feminine hygiene products, was a Beretta? What if Lori dropped Richie off at school in one of those brown paneled station wagons with a gun under the front seat, drove into the city for her assigned hit, wearing white gloves, and returned at night in time to make Dick a dry martini? What if she really liked taking just the right aim and thought about it when she used her feather duster or mopped the floor? What if other women, like you, like me, also have secrets we keep, despite our perfectly pedicured feet, our well-sculpted eyebrows?
I love that, Susan. That is so. Of course, I grew up watching the Dick Van Dyke show, so this is just great. And I love putting her within this what if context and applying it to the rest of us. Like, what if we were all a little bit different? So very nicely done.
Thank you.
And I'm kind of curious. I'm gonna go off script a little bit here, but like, what was it that led you to focus on Laura Petrie?
I think about this pretty often, honestly, how often people in our society can be overlooked, whether it's women or people of color or other people who have a whole interesting story to them. And what if we really, took people at their full worth and didn't just assign our first impressions to them? What a different place it could be. And so I wanted to take someone who many of us know and who seemed so squeaky clean and develop this backstory for her that I thought was pretty
I love it.
fun.
What a great idea. Okay, so returning to the reservation. So Susan, what is it that got you interested, first of all, in the Poetry Society of Virginia, for wanting to join, and what has it done for you?
Yeah, so thank you. So I guess I joined about 10 years now, and I was, just to be very candid, was going through a separation and divorce, and had always really enjoyed poetry, and had really written, whether, kind of fiction or nonfiction or prose, ever since I was a small girl. I'd always wanted to be a writer. But I have a different profession. And I thought, I really want to take my writing up a notch and see what I can do with it. And so I learned about PSV and have just loved it. I love being around the vibrant writing community in Virginia and Northern Virginia, which is our chapter. I've made some very dear friends. I've learned a lot. I think I've become a better writer. So that's really, it's just kind of transformed my life, really.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think my reasons were the same. I think your point about the vibrancy of the community of writers here across Virginia, but certainly in this part of Virginia where we live, is truly remarkable. And it's kind of reflected in the really great support we have for this Virginia Voices session once a month. So I agree completely. I think and having that community is just good for your own writing. If I may also go off script for a moment, in your welcoming Michelle here. Michelle, welcome very much. I believe you and I traveled to Vietnam together many years ago when I was working for DHS Citizenship and Immigration Services, and it's nice to have you here with us. Okay, Fairouz, would you like to share a poem with us?
Of course, I'd like to share a poem. So this might be because I'm a teenager, but I don't write a lot of lighthearted, fun poems. So I don't really have any of those to share, but I will start with one I wrote this a while ago. It was about a little moment where I was outside of my history class, and in another history class, I heard they were listening and watching a video about the Palestinian people and the whole situation that was going on over there. And in the video, there was a little boy that was screaming for his mother while he was being cornered by an Israeli soldier. And so I wrote about that. It was very sad for me, and he was screaming in Arabic. And I think I'm one of the only people in my school who speaks Arabic. I'm not really sure though. But yeah, so that's what I wrote. I wrote this poem about. It's called Dreaming of Roads Paved in Green, White, and Black, but the red isn't coming from your blood. Buses begging to be bulletproof and wishing to never find out. I touch the rust and pull it back, revealing pages of land covered in bloodstains. I blink and bring back peaceful farms and olive trees in my dead grandfather's house. Immature olives make chalk on cement painted pink. You're there, crammed in a corner, screaming in Arabic at first for your mom, but then knowing she isn't there, you envision your future in closed curtains and slow motion snapshots. Soldiers won't care if their bullet makes it into your brain and your memories pour out of your ear, or if it hits your heart and sends the shrapnel into their eyes. I reach past the peeling layers of metal and grab you, but my hands can't find your pulse because God has grabbed you first. Martyr, I cry, but my tongue twists back and my eyes scream, Shaheed. Years later, you'll grab my heart in my history class because while they see an assignment, I hear your cries for help. Thank you.
Fairouz, thank you for sharing that. That is such a powerful poem. And your point about maybe age-related, but falling more into dark poetry. And I totally get that. When I'm teaching like middle school kids or high school kids, those are hard years to get through. I mean, regardless of what's going on in the world or around you, it's just hard to go through that. And I would always try to convince either my middle schoolers or high schoolers that, you can use poetry in a very therapeutic way to work through some of the issues that are very powerful for you and that you feel very passionate about. And so thanks very much for sharing that. And that was a brilliant poem. And
Thank you for giving me the platform to share it. I appreciate it.
It was wonderful. So you are a new member to the Virginia Society of Poetry. You joined us through the Young Poets in the Community program. What was it that prompted you to participate in that program?
Okay, so other than a fancy title, because a young poet in the community is a really nice title, I'm not going to lie. But other than that, I always appreciated the thought of having a community of people that are like you and that, they'll encourage you and they're like, and I feel like I've been very fortunate in at least always having someone to support me. And I like the idea of having a community of people to support you. And then I saw this and I was like, now I feel like I can spread that to other people. And so me and my teacher, Miss G, shout out to Miss G. I love her, Miss Giwant. She's so awesome and cool. And we decided that we wanted to host a poetry fest at my school. And I was like, that's amazing because it helps not only get people in my school more involved because some people aren't as literary focused as some of us are. It helps them, see what we're doing and get more involved in that, but it also expands that to the community. Because I feel like I've also, again, been very fortunate in having an artistic expression of myself everywhere I went. Like, I feel like I've always had that outlet, and not a lot of people have discovered that part of themselves yet. And I feel like that Poetry Fest would give the opportunity to some people to discover that part of themselves. So yeah, that was my main reason.
And that's brilliant because seeing how poetry and the arts can work in a community of like-minded people, and especially to get people who maybe don't recognize that they have some kind of artistic or even poetic inclinations, just to exercise it, get on, see what you can do. I think is a great idea, and it does help build community. So very nicely said.
Thank you.
Fairouz, since you're on a roll, I will continue with you. Why don't you read another poem for us?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so this one, I'll go with a little more lighthearted one since the last one was a little rough. This one is more focused on me and my family. Embroidery is a very big part of Palestinian culture. If you've ever seen it in the traditional clothing, and they're called a thobe, is one of the traditional clothing for women, and you'll see a lot of embroidery on it, and it's very beautiful and it's very important. And I was doing embroidery for a history project, so that's what this is about. It's about my mom teaching me how to embroider something very simple the way her mom taught her. So yeah, that's what this poem's about. It's way more lighthearted. And it's titled Threaded Needles Are Intertwined Fingers. My new threads glow red, green, and black. The white of the ethymene is now ivory, faded from my mama's calloused hands, clasping it against itself. Cross-stitching is crossing my heart and hoping that when my soft skin traces old patterns, the strings will mimic the steps of my family's debje. If I fold the pattern in half and sew it together, I'll find half of my heart here and the other half swimming through seas to find olive oil not yet tasting the zartar. My sitti is a weathered woman, born with tough skin needles could never dream of getting through. I say the thread will instead dance in her mind. Her steps fade from red, green, black to red, white, and blue. Her hands are soft and her wrinkles are just memories hiding. Years ago, she puppeteered my mother's hand across the floral shape of my homeland in white threads and rusting ibar. Maybe borders are uneven stitches built by machines, and homeland is hand-sewn heart. Thank you.
Very nice connection there at the end to borders and seams. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Susan. Oh, or before we go to Susan, I'm sorry. Fairouz, tell us about your concept of poetry. Like, what is poetry for you? Oh, how do you see yourself as a poet? How do you approach poetry? How do you conceive of a poem? How does it work for you?
Okay, so I feel like there's a lot of people that give like a surface level answer, and usually what I say is poetry is my way to express myself, and I feel like that's very surface level. I feel like my deeper answer, and like, it's not just expression, because like I feel like that's one way to put it, but it's also I write for my younger self, and I write for other people other people out there like me. Because when I was younger, when I was watching shows and stuff, I never really saw like a Arabian girl or like a Palestinian girl on the screen, or like a Muslim girl on screen. And so that was something I always wanted to see. So I write for my younger self to see someone like me in the community, and I write for other people who were like my younger self out there looking for someone like them. And also, poetry is very fun, and it's a nice way of expression. It's a nice outlet. And I feel like it helps educate people in a manner that like is sensitive and gentle, and not like out there and like, you need to know this, you're bad if you don't do this. It helps people understand different perspectives in your own tone without being like, out there.
I think that's a great point to make. And I do the same thing. I often like write to my younger self. Tell me, have you ever had a poem where you're actually addressing your younger self?
I have one. I have a couple. So when I was younger, I really, there are a lot of things that young girls like experience or are told that, they don't really ever get like over or get explained. And so I write to her like as an older sister to my younger self. So I do have poems like that where I am addressing myself and comforting my younger self, my inner child.
Oh, I get that totally. I do the same thing, and like helping that part of you that maybe is still suffering that to work through it. And very well said. Okay, Susan, a poem.
Okay, so this next poem was published in by a journal called The Poet out of the UK, and they published a anthology about climate change. And typically, well, sometimes I write in a variety of ways, but sometimes I'll have something happen to me, and right when it happens, or right when I have an experience, I know I'm going to write a poem about it, and it's only a matter of time. It might be, within a couple of weeks, or it may take years, but I know right when it happens, I'm going to write about it. And this was one of those, and it's called Jellyfish in the Water. Not expecting the jellyfish, floating bulbous, innocuous at first glance, and not seeing them, I dove into the cool escape of the Ligurian Sea from my perch in the heat. So low in the water, I sculled as I do, floating on my back, wondering at my weightlessness. Then I saw a mother and child pointing from the safety of their beach mat, and realized I was alone in the water as other potential swimmers sweated on the sand. She took a child's plastic beach toy and scooped up a jellyfish, dumped it on the shore where it lay, gelatinous, shifting, purple-tipped, like a part of an eyeball or a mother's pudding. Looking into the sea then, I realized they were everywhere. How had I escaped being stung? Dangers lurking every day as shooters at grocery stores, parades, elementary schools, once in a generation floods, fires threatening homes and ancient trees. No wonder we are tempted to linger on the shores of our lives, unsure whether to dive in.
Oh my gosh, I love that ending. Waiting at the shores of our own lives to go in. That's powerful. That's really well written. So, Susan, for you, tell us about your approach to poetry, what kind of a poet you see yourself as, how poetry develops for you. How does it happen for you? How does poetry happen?
Well, as I believe I mentioned earlier, I've always wanted to be a writer and really written from the time I was a very small child. You know, journals and stories and pretty bad poetry when I was young, unlike Fairouz, who's very talented. But it took me quite a while until I considered myself a poet. I felt like it had you know, it took a presence, it was weighty. And so now I consider myself a poet. I think I just at some point became resigned because I write all the time, and I have a notebook by my bed and I write. And I think poets and writers generally are observers. They're observers of the world. They can be a little bit outsiders because they kind of have to be for our art. And sometimes that can be a little difficult. So I definitely consider myself a writer, and sometimes I find that a little hard. You know, sometimes I feel like, I wish I didn't have all this in my head. So I think partly writing poetry helps me get it out, and express my thoughts and feelings, and sometimes kind of deal with traumatic experiences, and share them in a way that can be beautiful despite the trauma. And then you can also connect with other artists and writers, and so that's a very good thing, and has such a long history of doing that. Makes artists feel less alone too, I think, which is really good. So that's why I write.
Yeah, I think your point about transforming trauma into something beautiful is just a very powerful thing to say, and I do that with my poetry a lot. But I'm curious, so you describe yourself as a longtime writer. Have you ever tried other genre of writing?
I've written other things, but never really tried to get them published. And so now that I'm becoming more older, I thought, I probably will. I'll probably write about some of my experiences in the Middle East at some point, because some of them are pretty traumatic. And I'll probably write, I really have traveled all over the world, and it's really, I find it pretty humbling, and I've learned a lot about myself and about the world. So I'll probably do some memoir writing. Yeah.
Have you
a question in the chat, if I can interrupt for a second? Eric wants to know if you write because you can't prevent yourself.
I think that's true. I think, writing can be a beautiful affliction.
that's so well
sometimes
said.
I'll be trying to sleep and I have my notebook by my bed and I can't sleep because I have to get out a line, because otherwise I'm worried I'll lose it. And then I really feel like if you get a good line in your head, you really do need to write it down as soon as possible, because you may lose it.
Yeah, and your point that there are some moments that we experience that when you experience it that you have to write about it, may not be able to write about it then. And like you say, it may be years before you can write about it, but you let it steep, you churn through it, and then you know when you're ready to write about it, and then it's very productive. But it's interesting what you say about, like, you know, when you experience it, that I have to write about this at some point. So, yeah, very good point. And I like your point about being a writer and at some point recognizing that, okay, I'm a poet. And I kind of did the same thing. I did a lot of just like personal writing and journal writing, and at some point it kind of shifted into being like poetry. And at some point, you know, I actually produced something that I thought, you know what, actually, this is a respectable poem. I should show this to somebody else and get some feedback. And it's a very kind of slow but healthy process to go through.
Yeah.
So, Susan, since we are just completing our 100th year in the Poetry Society of Virginia, what do you foresee, like, for the next 100 years for this organization? What do you see its role to be? Are there ways that it should change? And if so, in what way? What different directions should it take? And are there ways that you see yourself to play a role in that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Fairouz is here, and now we have young poets who are very interested in poetry and are keeping the tradition alive and in taking it in different directions is also very exciting. And I would love that to keep seeing that happen. And there's so many different kinds of poetry now. You know, there's the kind of more classic form-based poetry, there's spoken word poetry, there's I don't typically write form poetry, but I would like to do that in a contemporary style. So I'd like to see it keep evolving and keep being the vibrant community that it is, and maybe even more vibrant and more diverse. I'd like that a lot. Since I really do think globally, I would like to see the Poetry Society of Virginia become even more global. You know, perhaps we could have a sister organization in another country. That would be exciting. I would like, and Kathy and I worked on this, and Zaina and Sally, we all, and Eric, I think you did this as, yeah, we were all, a number of the poets who are on the screen today, we all participated in a global poetry event this spring. And that was very exciting because it was not only in our writing, but also kind of reflecting the global perspective. So I'd like to do more of that. I think that would be very interesting, and it would be something that I could do personally for the organization. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think your point, your suggestion about sister city organizations or sister organizations in other countries is great. That is such a great idea. And I don't know who's in charge of these kinds of things, but it is something that we should definitely look at as an organization. I think that's such a healthy, would add to the dynamism of the group that we have. You mentioned that, and that suggestion would help in those lines, but you mentioned also that it would be great if the Poetry Society of Virginia could be, whatever we could do to make it more vibrant, to enhance its vibrancy and its diversity. Do you have any thoughts on how we might do that? Like, especially like the vibrancy of it?
I mean, it does actually seem pretty vibrant to me now, but I really am glad that we are getting younger poets such as Fairouz and more people of color. I think that's a very important development. It has, in the past, it tended to be more white. And I do think that it's important. It's important to reflect all voices. So I'm excited about that, and I'd like to see that continue. But other poets may have other ideas about that, and that would be exciting too.
Yeah. I think your points are all really valid, and I think whatever we can do as an organization to move in that direction would certainly be good for the organization and for the rest of us. As you say, whatever we can do to integrate the diversity of voices in our organization at a time when otherwise cultural things seem to be separating our voices, is a very healthy thing to do. So
I agree. Yeah.
Very well said. Do you have a last poem that you would like to read for us, or maybe a last two poems, since we are making good time?
Oh, okay. So this one I'll read. This was published in a journal called Gyroscope, which I like a lot. And I wrote this poem during the height of the pandemic, when I was home a lot, and I like to take long walks in my neighborhood, and there are some lovely big old trees. And when I take these walks, I say I'm going to visit the trees, and I like to put my hands on the trees, and I really feel like I can feel their energy, because they're probably 150 years old. They're big old trees, and I think about everything they've seen. But then I've always really been interested in kind of homeopathic herbs and homeopathy, and just how much we still rely on some of that ancient tradition, which often dates back to kind of wise women and natural healing. So this poem is called Botanica. My cottage lies at the village edge, roof, mast, and moss. From the ceiling beams hangs mugwort to promote dreaming and divination, bundles of rosemary to banish burglars. In morning, young women arrive, seeking love and children. For them, I provide patchouli and basil oil for sensuality, lavender for calm and to quell their impatience. To the old, I proffer sage smoke for wisdom, willow bark for aching knees, turmeric for inflammation or cancer. In the late afternoon, melancholia arrives, as she often does, particularly when the mist is thick. To her, I offer yarrow to regain composure. Night brings the fox. See his glinting eyes, his burnt umber coat, as he sits by my hearth, tells me his exploits before he vanishes like the smoke from my chimney, talking to the trees.
That is brilliant. That is so powerful. Particularly when the mist is thick, night brings the fox. Those are just such powerful lines. And clearly you were feeling the power of those lines as you were reading them. And it's always wonderful when that happens, that when the power of your words overtake your own voice. You talked some about trees, and I'm kind of the same way. Do you have any tree poems?
I've been wanting to write more tree poems because I really like these trees a lot. But so now you'll inspire me to write some more tree poems. Zaina has a lovely tree poem that's really great. But I haven't written as many as I'd like to. So will inspire me.
All right.
Yeah.
A task.
Michelle is requesting the Georgia O'Keeffe poem.
Yeah, Michelle.
I can read that one. Should I read that, or
Sure.
do you want to go to Fairouz?
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay.
Lady of the audience.
All right, so this poem was published in a publication called Northern Virginia Bards. And it's a great organization. They publish quite a bit of our colleagues' poetry, so it's nice to see them. And like many of us, I have really always been fascinated by Georgia O'Keeffe and her lover Alfred Stieglitz relationship, because they were both artists. Of course, he was a famous photographer and she was an incredible American painter. And he took a series of photos of her hands, which I was fascinated by as a painter, because I thought, he's really showing her tools for her craft. So this is called Hands with Grapes. In sepia tones, O'Keeffe's fingers are splayed on a leaf, plucking grapes, spider-like in their agility. Sense her impatience at posing for her lover while he clicked frame after frame until he found just the right one. This was before O'Keeffe left full-time for the American Southwest. Yet in the stretch of her fingertips, you can sense her yearning for what lies beyond the frame, what she'd seek to capture away from him in Abiquiu and Taos and cow skulls and dusty mesas. Alfred, you can hear her say, hurry the hell up.
Love it. Okay, thanks. Fairouz, so give us your thoughts on what you would like to see from the Poetry Society of Virginia over the next 100 years.
Okay, so I
What would you
think
like us to do? What do we need to do? And given your thoughts about community, what do we need to do?
so. I agree with what Miss Susan said about like new faces. I think it's gonna be so cool as like I get older and then see more like new people coming in. I think that's really cool, and I think it's going to expand. I feel like you guys are going to expand. I don't know, it's like somehow, some way. I feel like you're going to expand. I feel like getting into schools more might help you guys out with that, especially places like my school, guys. We love literary arts. We have a whole. That's like our thing. So yeah, I think getting more involved with the youth would help expand. Get new faces and get more people in, because a lot of people like to write poetry. They just don't have the people and the support to do it. Like a regular school maybe that doesn't have a literary arts department program. Maybe I feel like especially when I was in middle school, obviously I was in a regular middle school that a lot of people didn't really like to write stuff. It was a time.
You're
and
being
I feel
generous.
like if you guys yeah, I feel like it was a time, and I feel like if I had like the support then and like a community of people that also like to write poetry, I probably would have written a lot more of it.
I think that's a great point. I think getting whatever we can do as an organization to get into the schools is couldn't be more important. I just know that, like, again, from teaching middle and high schoolers and also being familiar with my fellow English teachers, that poetry is met with fear and loathing. And for the most part, by the teachers, because they don't understand it, they can't teach it, aside from a few exceptions, and by the students because it's not taught well, and it's presented in a very intimidating way. So I can remember one of my seniors last year telling me, I asked my seniors at the end of the year, so like, what was the best thing? This was all virtual. What was the best thing you liked about the course? And because it was senior year, it was Brit Lit. A number of kids said the romantic poets, and I was like, wow, okay, let's talk about that. And one girl piped up said, up until now, I've always viewed poetry as just kind of like these kind of obliquely worded lines that sometimes rhyme and seem to mean something, but that is not quite evident to me. And so I never knew what to do with it. And so I didn't. And then she said, being exposed to like the passion of the British Romantic poets, it was a total eye opener to see poetry as a vehicle for passion, and that's what that's what it should be. Like it's like there are so many passions that can find no other way to be expressed other than poetry, and so I think that's a good point. Getting what we can do as an organization, get poetry more effectively into the schools, I think is a great point. Do you have a suggestion for how to do that?
Well, I do like the young poets in the community thing. I think that's very cool, and I really enjoyed my time. I really enjoyed doing and working on that project with my teacher, and getting more people in my school involved and inviting my friends and everything. That was super fun. I think, I don't know, I guess more of maybe also like, I don't know, I feel like there should be like I feel like there could be like a public Zoom meeting or something just to educate English teachers on poetry, because I know in ARGS, in my school, Appomattox Regional Governor's School, I love my school so much. I will always shout it out. The teachers there are awesome in the English department and in the literary arts department. I haven't had a negative experience with any of them, and I love them very much. But in my middle school, I feel like a lot of the teachers, like you said, met poetry with, it's bland, it's boring, they didn't like it. It was like, here, rhyme like these 3 lines, like write this rhyming poem. And then all of the kids were like, I don't want to rhyme. Like
Right.
The fat cat sat on the mat, and it was very boring, and it was never exciting and fun. And it was always just that one type of poetry that was taught. And it was never like, you don't have to rhyme. You don't have
Exactly.
to have all these rules.
Yeah, I would tell my students that this is the one time I'm not going to hammer you about punctuation, about sentence fragments, about capitalization. Just write what you feel. So also I think what we can do as an organization to get poets into the classroom could be helpful. Like actually real poets who can help teachers when they get to their poetry sessions, and get them in the classroom and like show kids that like, hey, you know what? Poetry can be fun. Poetry can actually be interesting.
Yeah. Guest speakers are always exciting in the classroom.
It's a difference, right? It's like not the same teacher that you have every day. It's like get something different and you pay more attention, right? Especially if you're like a middle school kid or a high school kid, and this person is actually a poet. And it changes. I think it changes the climate. It changes the way in which the poetry lesson is received. So maybe you could volunteer some time back to your school to be a poet in the classroom.
Always. I love my school.
So do you have a couple of poems you'd like to leave us with?
Okay, sure. So do you want me to read just one or two? My poems are very small.
So. Do a couple.
Okay, so I'll read 2. This was one of my first experiences with foreign poetry, and it was in my poetry class at school with Miss G, and we were writing abecedarians. And so I think this was like my first abecedarian that I wrote. I think it was my first or my second, and I really enjoyed it. It was really fun. And this one doesn't focus on anything about like my heritage or anything. This one was just cool ocean imagery. And at the time I was also really obsessed with like Christian religious imagery. So there's like mention of Christ, even though I myself am not a Christian. But yeah. So it's called In My Own Funeral I Weep. And I find myself asking, but will you hold me when I'm drowning? Can you find my bones fossilized in sedimentary sea rock? Did you catch my hair hidden in seaweed, an oceanic broom sweeping the sea floor, everlasting, a corpse salted? Find me hidden in the hermit's home, God's Christ gone crustacean. He'll see me sulking under the sea floor, anglers angled towards me, incandescent seabed emitting a glimpse of glory from a life well lived, just waiting for the damned distraction named me to flee. Knives coming from puffers, patiently waiting, let me suffer before finding purgatory. My flesh can be covered in barnacles, never a cremated corpse, but barely even breathing. Open the casket and see the shipwreck inside. Peer at the Titanic, thought to be titanium, and watch it break. Question how far I've reached out of the waves and into the sun's beams and basked in them. There I can search for heaven hidden in between the rays that don't sting, until I can't uncover what lay beneath the UV. Vexed, I return back to my worldly matters of the Mediterranean, knowing that no one expects anything of me. Yearning for the afterlife caught in the waves, but instead finding Xeons, just sandcastles withering away in the wind.
Nice ending.
Thank you.
That is such a powerful poem. And you know what? You make a very good point about there is such a cultural and historical legacy of Christian imagery that we can use in our writing, even if we're not Christian. That can be very powerful because it's part of the baggage that we all have, right? It's like you can reference the imagery, and it carries a lot for whoever your reader is in their own individual way. And I think that's a very good tool to use. I do a lot of that sometimes with Christian imagery, sometimes with like Greek mythology. But yeah, we have these this like cultural toolbox of imagery that we should use. And so well done. Do you have another one?
I do have another one. So this one is back to what I usually write, which is more Palestinian poetry. And this one was actually my homesickness for Palestine. So previously I had only ever been there for 3 months when I was 8 years old. But fortunately this year I did have the privilege of being able to go back for a month and see all my family and see my homeland. And it was a beautiful experience. But this poem was written before I was able to have that and before I knew that I was able to go. So it's called Does a Girl Hope for a Home She Never Knew? Oh, the Google Doc is loading, sorry. Okay. Does a girl hope for a home she never knew? Or does she appreciate what she has? No dead siblings lying with 13 bullet wounds on a street of misfortune, another Palestinian protester left for dead. She has warm water for washing off the wax she puts on to please people, unlike her grandmother, who waits for water every week, collects it in metal buckets, and brings it to a boil instead of bathing in salted tears. El Mayya Msekra. When the girl goes outside, gunmen are watching with wild eyes as she waits behind glass borders at a checkpoint to a city she should own. Crowds can cover her cries, but the soldiers still see her. Her mother looks back at her, mouthing from the other side, Uskuti, ya Fairouz. When she goes to a supermarket, she has fresh food and she can afford it. No street markets where lungs fill with the scent of stale bread instead of air. Garrick, Garrick. But she doesn't have family here. She can't wake up to breakfast made by her grandmother, fried potatoes with ketchup brought from the corner store down the broken street, but shipped from America. She won't hear Ilich, ya Sitti. She doesn't have a community of girls just like her, standing in the prayer line, their stilettos left behind them, folding long, layered sleeves to talk to God. Allahu Akbar. But what she misses most is the golden dome she's encased her heart in. Unknowingly, she left bits of her soul behind, cowering in the red fuzzy carpets, with yellow arches outlining each prayer section. Leave me here. Thank you.
Oh, love that. And I love the last
Thank
line.
you.
What was I going to say? Were you writing to your younger self there?
In a way, yes. And also writing to my current, like my feeling of homesickness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of rooted in both who you are and who you were.
Yeah. It was also like about my memories. Like I was very young, so I didn't really remember a lot of things vividly, but I did have some memories that were very that I remembered very well, and then other things that I didn't remember at all.
Right. And as we all know, like poetry is so intimately linked to memory. When you went back for a period this past year?
Yeah, this year actually, I recently came back. I've only been here for I think I think I might have been here for a week. I came here, yeah, I've almost a week. I arrived here in America last Thursday.
Okay, so was that a complex experience for you?
Okay, in a way it was, but not really. I missed it. I missed it a lot. And I cried when we landed. I cried when I saw all the palm trees, and just like overlooking the mountains. And I cried a lot. I cried a lot when I was there. I cried when I entered Jerusalem for the first time. I cried when I saw the Dome of the Rock for the first time, like the second time, I guess. But I cried a lot whenever I saw things again. But then there were other things that felt like, it changed a lot since I've been there. So some
Yeah,
things felt different, especially the checkpoints that I mentioned. The checkpoint is actually now border control.
yeah.
So it was an experience to say the least, but it was definitely simpler than I remember. They've really, technological advancements. It's really much simpler now, and I feel like there's less tense, like, it's really not as tense over there anymore. They have less people, crowded together. It changed a lot, but it was a beautiful experience, and it was amazing.
So going back to Susan's point about like some moments you live where you have to write about them, you probably acquired a wealth of them during that visit.
Yeah, I have like a whole notes, like iPhone notes, like folder about like all the things I want to write about and like all the ideas I have and all the things I saw.
Yeah.
And I even like midsummer emailed Miss G one of the poems that I wrote, also a little experience I had in a hair salon. Like
Yeah,
it was great.
very, very wonderful. Um, all right, a couple of things. So Susan, Fairouz, thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us and your thoughts on poetry. This
Thank
has been
you.
wonderful. And I want to thank everybody who has joined us for your great participation in the chat. This is like one of the best chats I've ever seen. So well done, everybody. Fairouz and Susan, like I said, we will save the chat, but save it for yourselves because there's a lot of great comments in here about your poetry that you may want to take a look at to give some thought to, like to things that struck other people that you may not have thought would strike somebody else. We have a few more minutes, so let's open it up to questions. Do any of you have any questions that you would like to ask either Susan or Fairouz? Or comments? Discussion?
Just a quickie, Mark Freiberg here, my new member. Again, thanks to everyone who got me started here. Very new poet. So of course, I'm going to ask if either of our guests would like to give me advice on how, besides attending these, I can become a better poet. Totally open-ended.
Maybe I'll jump in first. I mean, I think, well, a couple things. People, I'm always constantly interested in people talking about their writing and their approach to writing and how, even whether you write longhand or whether you compose on a computer at first. I tend to compose longhand because I'm afraid of deleting anything too quickly. Some people will compose on a computer and then save different versions. But find a version that works for you and don't immediately edit things out because you may put something on the cutting room floor that is actually very good. But having said that, edit, I think there's a tendency for people not to edit their poetry enough and really think about it all. Think about how it appears on a page, think about the spacing, think about the sounds. It's meant to be, of course, an oral tradition. So read it out loud and you will I find if there's something not working in your poem, you'll hear it when you read it out loud. It will be jarring. So those are, and then I guess also write about things that really matter to you. You can, some it can be scary to write about something that really matters to you. And I haven't really read some of my hard poems today because I didn't really want to go there today. But I think it can be some of the most powerful poetry, as we've just heard with Fairouz, just because you really care about it, but it can be scary. Anyway, I'll stop there. We could,
Thank you very
there's
much.
a lot of other
Very good.
poets here too who can chat.
I was tempted to write it longhand as I typed. That was good advice.
That is a good piece of advice, Mark. And I find that there is like a visceral connection, like a visceral creativity connection between writing in longhand and your creative imagination as opposed to typing. So it is something to think about trying it out longhand and see what it does for your poetry.
I can add on to that. Now, I would also say that I'm a relatively new poet. I've only been doing poetry seriously for 2 years, and that's with the help of all my school guys. It's so awesome. I love ARGs. I love the teachers at ARGs. I love my friends at ARGs. You guys are amazing. And I would not say that I'm qualified to give advice, but I'll just say what helps me write poetry, and what I've learned while writing poetry with the amazing experienced poets at my school and my amazing teacher, Miss G. So peer review and peer editing and workshops with people that you're friends, people that you know, more experienced poets, anyone that you, even someone who doesn't write poetry. I like to sometimes give my poems to my mom and let her read them because she's not a poet. She doesn't like to write anything, but her advice from like an outside perspective can help. And also sometimes people who don't write poetry will pick up on things that people who do write poetry don't, like, yeah, and like sound and stuff, and like, it's just nice. Peer review, that's the big thing. I've had poems that went from like terrible first drafts to like good poems just because of my friends and my teachers who helped me fix them.
And I think, that's such an important point. And it's also really, there's a number of us who are on the screen who are all part of the same writing group. And what's also very valuable is that we're a kind group, but we give some pretty constructive criticism. So be in a group that actually does that and doesn't just say nice things about your poetry, because you won't grow then. Everybody can grow.
Thank you. And to Fairouz, I want to say, based on what I heard tonight, you were thoroughly qualified to give me advice. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And thanks, Mark, for your question. It was a very good one because there are a lot of young poets here or new poets, and that kind of advice is good for everybody.
You betcha.
Okay, again, thanks to all of you for joining us today and for your great contributions to this discussion of poetry and appreciation of poetry. Kathy, any comments? Anything you want to know?
Yeah, just that I put my email address in the chat in case you're interested in more information about poetry in the world that Susan mentioned. Also, I can give you information about the Young Poets in the Community program. If you know students or teachers, student poets or teachers or anybody who has connections to young people, we have the information just going out for this next year's selection process. We're also looking for any funding sources that we can tap into to help us be able to select the maximum number of poets in the community. At the moment, we'll be limited by the funding that's available with the PSV. So if anyone has any suggestions, please send them my way. And the Northern region will be having 2 Poetry of Place readings on Zoom, one on the 17th of August and one in September. And so if you're interested in those, again, you can email me for any of that information, and I can also get you in touch with Steve or with Jay Deshay, I mentioned, is in charge of poetry in the schools now and is just getting started on some plans to move that forward. So Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Okay,
Thanks,
again,
everybody. Thanks for joining.
yes, thanks, everybody. This was a great session.
Hey Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, this is Andy Smiley. I wanted to let you know the Poetry Foundation, I believe, is accepting applications for grants
Okay.
up to September 1st.
Thank you very much. I will look into that.
You might want to check that out.
Thank you very much. And thanks for being a regular.
Yeah. Okay, I will stop the recording now.
Okay.